Here's a review of the things we've done in the last section. We learned about the list style type property and all the different values. This is just a few of them, but there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can set that list style, that list marker, including turn it off. We understood that we could style it different in a nested list, and that way the nested list has a different style marker. And we can do as many different levels as are needed for our web page. We also learned that with list style, we could do an image by using an URL and one of our in-image file. We could actually use an image for the list marker. And the position could be either inside or outside. And that we can combine the list style type, image, and position into a single list style property. And they can go in any order, and all are optional. Then we learned about the CSS box model, that the content is contained in a box, and then outside of that is padding that provides space between the content and the border, and that's something that we can adjust, and we did some adjusting of that. Then there's a border section, and we haven't done any adjusting of the border. We'll do that later. But then we did the margin, which is the space between the border and the next element. And we learned how to set the margin. So the padding property that we can use with 1 value, 2 values, or 4 values, or if we just want to set a single side, we can just choose one of the ones that identify a specific side. And same with margin, that we could set those margin properties in those very similar ways. We use some pseudo classes, and these are ones that we attach to an element with a single colon. So P first child, these allow us to select elements based on where they are, their position, their status, their use. And so we learned several. There's lots of these that we can use to access specific parts, their specific elements. We learned about dynamic pseudo classes, which is when the user does something like hover, that you can change the style when an element is hovered over. And that these dynamic pseudo classes are used a lot when you do A-links. And specifically, we do the pseudo classes link, visited, hover, and active, and that it's important to do them in a specific order. We learned about the quote property and how you can identify opening and closing quotes. And you can do pairs so that if you nest some, then you can choose different quotes for the nested ones, characters for those internal quotes. We learned about pseudo elements, and pseudo elements have 2 quotes or 2 colons instead of just 1. And they let us select a specific part of an element, and there were about 5 of these pseudo elements. And we learned about the content property that allows us to actually add content in CSS using a pseudo element. So here's the pseudo element before, and we add content. And this one adds content that is actually an image. And we added content that was an open quote or a close quote. And here's one that is the pseudo element after, and there's the content close quote. Then we validated, like we did the HTML before, we used validator.w3.org, but we learned about a new validator that validates our CSS files, jigsaw.w3.org/cs-validator. And then we published and composed the URL. It took me a while to get the URL right, but that's okay because we can keep trying until it shows up, and then we know we've got it. And that's what we covered in this section.